Awakening dismantles illusion, not reality. It is the slow unraveling of the stories we have been telling ourselves about who we are and what the world is. For most of life, we live inside a dream woven from thoughts, beliefs, and social conditioning. A dream so convincing that we call it reality. We chase desires, avoid fears, and build entire identities around ideas that were handed to us. We cling to names, titles, possessions, and relationships as if they define the totality of our being. But spiritual awakening comes like a quiet storm that begins to wash away the paint from the walls of our constructed world. It does not destroy anything real. It only exposes what was never real to begin with. When this begins to happen, there is often confusion, even fear. You start to notice that what you once believed to be solid starts to dissolve. The roles you played, the achievements you were proud of, the opinions you defended so fiercely, all of these begin to feel strangely hollow. You look around and wonder why everything seems to have lost its meaning. The truth is that nothing has lost its meaning. Rather, you are beginning to see through the false meanings you had imposed upon it. The illusion of separateness, of control, of certainty begins to fade. And as those illusions fade, the raw immediacy of life begins to reveal itself, not as something to conquer or understand, but as something to be. In this process, you might feel as though everything is slipping away, as though the universe is taking from you all that you once held dear. But awakening does not rob you of anything genuine. It only dissolves the fabrications that stood between you and reality. The self you lose was never truly yours. It was a costume you wore to navigate a play you thought was life. The loss, therefore, is not a punishment, but a purification. It clears the fog so that you can see what has always been right in front of you, the simple, vibrant presence of existence itself. This is why awakening can be disorienting. The mind has spent a lifetime defining reality through filters of judgment, comparison, and expectation. When those filters fall away, the mind feels naked. It cannot comprehend the simplicity of what remains. There are no labels, no boundaries, no fixed points to hold on to. The ego panics, for it thrives on definition. But beneath that panic, a deeper intelligence begins to emerge. The quiet awareness that has always been there, watching, untouched by the drama of thought. What awakening dismantles, then, are the walls that kept you confined within the illusion of separateness. When those walls crumble, you begin to sense that you were never a fragment of existence trying to fit into a whole. You were always the whole expressing itself through a fragment. The dismantling feels like death to the ego, but it is birth to the soul. In seeing through illusion, reality finally reveals itself, not as something new, but as something that was waiting patiently beneath every falsehood you once believed to be true. Nothing outside changes, yet everything inside shifts. That is the paradox of awakening. The external world remains as it always was, yet the eyes that behold it are no longer the same. You still wake up in the same bed, see the same faces, walk the same streets, but something subtle and profound has transformed within you. It is as if the film of dust that covered your perception has been wiped away, and what was once ordinary now glows with quiet significance. You realize that the world was never dull or lifeless. It was your conditioned mind that had made it so. The first thing that changes is how you see rather than what you see. You begin to notice the space between moments, the silence between words, the stillness behind movement. Life no longer appears as a collection of objects and events to be manipulated or owned, but as a continuous flow that you are inseparably part of. The tree outside your window, the sound of rain, even the breath rising and falling in your chest. All of it feels alive in a way you had forgotten. The shift is not dramatic, it is subtle, quiet, and deeply intimate. But because your perception changes, the meaning you once gave to everything starts to collapse. You may find yourself uninterested in things that once thrilled you, or unable to participate in dramas that once consumed you. People might say you've changed, though you cannot point to any visible evidence. The truth is that your inner landscape has reorganized itself. The need to control, to possess, to prove, begins to dissolve. You stop trying to fit reality into your expectations, and instead allow it to unfold as it wishes. What used to provoke frustration now stirs curiosity. What used to trigger fear now awakens compassion. This internal shift also reveals how much of your suffering was self-created. You see that life was never cruel or unfair. It was your resistance to what is that created the illusion of pain. The events of the world are still unpredictable. People still behave as they will, and circumstances still change. Yet the way you relate to them transforms entirely. You become less reactive and more responsive, less defensive and more open. It is as though the same storm still rages, but you are no longer standing in the rain, you have become the sky that holds it all. And this is perhaps the most liberating realization of all, that nothing had to change outside you for your experience of life to become completely different. The miracle is not that the world improves, but that your perception deepens. Awakening turns the mundane into the sacred, the painful into the instructive, the fleeting into the eternal. The same world remains, but your relationship to it has dissolved into unity. You no longer see life as happening to you. You see it as happening through you, as you in every breath, every sound, every silent moment of being. Awakening is not about gaining anything new. It is the art of shedding everything that isn't real. The modern mind is trained to accumulate knowledge, possessions, beliefs, and spiritual techniques, as if enlightenment were a prize to be won at the end of a long and noble struggle. Yet, the deeper one journeys, the clearer it becomes that the path leads not upward but inward, and inward means toward emptiness. Awakening in its truest sense is a process of subtraction. It is the gradual dissolving of everything false, everything borrowed, until what remains is not something added but something uncovered, the simple awareness that was always there. This process rarely feels glamorous. In fact, it often feels like decay. The images you built of yourself begin to crumble, the clever one, the good one, the broken one, the important one. All masks begin to fall away. You start to see that your personality, which you once believed was you, is merely a collection of reactions, preferences, and fears stitched together over time. When awakening begins, the universe seems to take a scalpel to those layers, cutting through them one by one. It doesn't hurt in the physical sense, but there is a kind of spiritual nakedness that can feel unbearable at first. You are stripped of every comforting identity you once held, and yet beneath the discomfort lies a deep, almost imperceptible relief. Because for the first time, you are no longer pretending. You realize that all the striving to become someone better, more enlightened, or more spiritual was just another layer of illusion. The truth does not require adornment. The essence of being cannot be improved, only revealed. So awakening does not fill you up. It empties you out. It takes away the unnecessary until only what is essential remains. The irony, of course, is that this emptiness is full of clarity, full of peace, full of the unshakable knowing that you are not separate from life. The ego resists this process because it equates letting go with death. It says, if I release all that I know myself to be, what will be left? And the answer is frightening to it, nothing. But this nothing is not a void of despair. It is the spaciousness in which everything exists. It is the awareness that watches all forms arise and pass without clinging. When you are no longer defined by what you possess or what you know, you begin to see the perfection of simply being. So awakening is not a path of accumulation but of erasure. Each illusion that falls away leaves you lighter, freer, closer to the still point within. In losing what was false, you gain nothing in the ordinary sense, yet you gain everything that truly matters, a direct, unfiltered communion with life itself. Nothing is added, nothing achieved, and yet everything is transformed. The ego fears what the soul welcomes. This is the great tension that defines the journey of awakening. The ego, that fragile construct built from memories, comparisons, and social conditioning, it thrives on certainty. It clings to identity like a child clutching its favorite toy, terrified of being without it. It wants control, security, and continuity, a predictable story that it can call my life. But awakening threatens all of that. It comes not to destroy the self, but to reveal that the self, as the mind imagines it, was never real to begin with. And so the ego trembles because awakening feels like death to it. When one begins to awaken, the ego senses danger. It whispers warnings, insisting that without its definitions, everything will collapse. It tells you that without ambition, you'll lose purpose. Without control, you'll fall apart. Without identity, you'll disappear. The mind believes that to let go is to die. But the soul, that vast, silent presence beneath thought, understands the deeper truth. It knows that what dies in awakening is not you, but the illusion of you. The death of the false self is not an ending. It is the unmasking of something timeless. The ego resists this surrender with every tactic it knows. It distracts, it doubts, it argues, it clings. It will even use spirituality as a disguise, turning awakening into another achievement to boast about. Yet the soul does not fight back. It waits patiently, as it always has, knowing that no resistance can last forever. Eventually, the exhaustion of clinging brings about its own kind of grace. When you finally grow tired of defending what isn't real, something within you softens. The struggle ceases, and what remains is stillness, the open awareness that has always been quietly observing the ego's drama. In that stillness, you begin to see that what the ego called death is actually freedom. You do not disappear, rather, you expand beyond the limits of your imagined self. The fear that once paralyzed you gives way to a gentle awe. You start to see life not as something happening to you, but as something expressing itself through you. Every breath, every sound, every sensation is recognized as a movement of the same consciousness you once believed was trapped inside a separate body and mind. This is why the soul welcomes what the ego fears, because it understands that losing control is not chaos, it is liberation. It understands that uncertainty is not danger, but openness. The soul rejoices in what the mind cannot grasp, because it knows that the true self was never in jeopardy. The ego's collapse is simply the removal of the veil that hid your boundless nature. And when that veil lifts, you find that what you once feared losing was never truly yours, and what remains was never truly gone. You discover that behind every loss lies the quiet joy of remembering who you have always been: infinite, untouched, and free. In losing everything, you discover oneness. At first, this sounds poetic, even comforting, but when it begins to unfold in lived experience, it can feel more like a quiet annihilation. You watch the things that once defined you slip away, not necessarily in the physical sense, but in meaning. The relationships you depended on for validation begin to lose their charge. The goals you once chased seem hollow. Even your spiritual ambitions fade, because the very you who wanted them is dissolving. It feels like standing in a room where all the furniture has vanished, leaving only empty space. But as that space widens, something extraordinary begins to emerge: the realization that what you took to be emptiness is actually fullness. That the loss of everything reveals the presence of everything. You start to sense that the boundary between you and the world was an invention. What you called my thoughts are not truly yours, they arise and fall like waves on the ocean. What you called my body is not separate either. It is made of the same elements as the trees, the stars, the water. The distinction between the observer and the observed begins to blur. The line between inner and outer melts away. You realize that the same intelligence that moves the planets moves your breath. The same stillness that fills the sky fills your consciousness. You have not lost the world. You have simply lost the illusion that you were ever apart from it. In this recognition, there is a profound peace. It does not come from acquiring anything new, but from finally ceasing to resist what has always been. The striving to become something better, to find meaning, to reach a destination, all of it collapses into the understanding that there was never anywhere to go. Existence is not a journey with an end, it is a dance unfolding moment by moment. When you stop clinging, you begin to move in rhythm with it. The sense of separation that caused all your loneliness and fear dissolves, and what remains is an unspeakable intimacy with everything. The irony of awakening is that you lose what was never real to find what never left. The sense of I that walked the world in constant tension finally relaxes. You no longer see others as strangers, nor nature as background scenery. You see yourself reflected in every face, every movement of wind, every flicker of light. The world becomes your mirror, and everything in it, joy and sorrow, life and death, is recognized as a single expression of the same eternal flow. And so, what once felt like loss reveals itself as the deepest gain. You discover that nothing essential can ever be taken from you, because there was never a separate you. To lose it, the self that dies in awakening, was only the shadow cast by the light of awareness. When that shadow disappears, you find yourself not diminished but infinite, not empty but whole.